Hi everyone, this is going to be quite a long video because we're talking about a lot of different things, so let's get straight into it. The first thing we want to talk about is how to format a table in Microsoft Excel. Now I will say this, don't stress too much about making it pretty in Excel, do all the fancy formatting in Word. So in Excel, your primary focus is just to make it like a usable table that is understandable. So a few tips I like to use to try and just make it a bit more usable or clear. One of my favorite features is this merge and center. So if that's how I got this whole like thing with two rows happening, I just used two rows in Excel, and then I just selected these boxes and pressed merge and center, which allows me basically to have this one split into two, so I can have my label up here with my trials down here. So merge and center is a handy button. Wrap text is another handy button. What it does is it turns it from going just into a single line, is it makes it go into different lines to fit into the text box so you can actually see all the writing. So wrap text is another handy one. The final thing I like to do just to make it easy to use, and this is completely non-essential, it's purely for aesthetics, this button here, it puts little borders on boxes, so I like to just, highlight certain things and put a border around them, just so I can actually see my clear table. So that's just how I like to set up my table, just to make it easy to understand. Now, when it comes to formatting your table, you also need to make sure you're including uncertainty. So in where to put the uncertainty, you need to put it in the actual column heading. So you see here I have a time, plus or minus, and you would put whatever your uncertainty is, then your units. So uncertainty, so plus minus number, and then put your units in there. And you can see I've got that for all of my raw data measurements. I also have a little column over here for calculating the uncertainty of my average, which I'll talk about in a moment. So make sure you include your uncertainty and include your units in the column headings. The other last tip I have, only put numbers in the actual cells. Do not put like S for seconds or G for grams, only have numbers. If you have letters in those cells, it's going to like mess up Excel. When you go to do formulas, it'll have a bit of a fit. So only put numbers in your actual cells. Okay, next on the list, how to calculate an average. Now, you know how to calculate an average. Add things together, sum all the values, and then divide by the number of values. So you could do it by hand using a calculator, or you can make Excel do it for you. So this is how you do it. So I've got a little column over here where I want to put all my averages in. Now, to write a formula in Excel, you start by pressing equals. Then, an average is the sum of values, so we need to add things together. So I'm going to select this box here, and then press Shift plus, so add that box, plus that, plus that, plus. It's going to be, oh no. This is the joys of Excel. Why wouldn't it let me do that? Okay. Let's press that box first so it doesn't. The issue I had before is I couldn't see that last box, so let's do it this way so I can actually see all of my boxes. So I've added them all together. I suggest writing up on this thing here, by the way. Now I need to put that in brackets, just like a calculator. You need to tell it to do bomb dash. So I want it to add all these things together and then divide by the number of things. So I added 5 numbers together, so I'm going to divide by 5. And if I press equals, it has calculated the average for me. Now I'll say this, when you have it, it might give you like a really long decimal. Good rule of thumb, in senior science, we'll talk about significant figures a bit more in depth. But basically, in year 10, a good rule of thumb is if you are only using numbers that were measured to 2 decimal places, like on the stopwatches, your answer should be to 2 decimal places. So to round numbers in Excel, so these 2 buttons over here, you can make more decimals, or you can make it have less decimals and it will round it. So I'm going to round to 2 decimal places. So that is how I calculated an average. Equals, in brackets, add them all together, so just click on the cell plus, divide by 5 equals. Now here's the beauty of Excel. Rather than having to rewrite the formula for every single row, what I can do is I can click on my original box. In this bottom right hand corner, it has this little mini box. You can see how it goes black when I hover over it. Click on that, drag it down. Oops, try again. Click on that, drag it down, and it actually copies. You can see up here, you can see it's copying the formula down. So it's automatically calculating the averages for all of these. That is so much quicker than doing it by hand. So that's how to calculate an average in Excel. Next, how to calculate uncertainty. So the uncertainty of an average, our formula, is the maximum value minus the minimum value divided by 2. So basically, big number takes small number, so the range, divided by 2. Now, we can make Excel do this for us, but we can't drag it down like last time. We have to do it for each row. So equals, I need to have a look at my data and choose the biggest number, so it would be this one. Take away the smallest number, which is that one. Put it in brackets. I always forget to write brackets first. So put it in brackets, divided by 2. And that is the average of, so the uncertainty of my average here. So we can do that for all of these boxes. So equals, bracket, big number, take away the smallest number. If you have two numbers that are the same smallest, just choose one of them. It doesn't really matter. Divided by 2, so equals, big number, take away small number, divided by 2. So these are the uncertainties of my averages. Now note, over here for a minute. Usually, you would write an uncertainty right next to the value. So if 0.45 was your average, you would have plus minus your uncertainty right next to it. However, just in Excel, we had to put it in a separate column just to make it calculate it for us. When we then copy it over to Microsoft Word in a moment, you can see down here, I've put them back into the same cell again. So they belong next to each other. It's just in Excel that we have a separate column just so it actually calculates it for us. So that is how to calculate the uncertainty of my average. Next on my list, how to calculate acceleration. So we know our little formula for acceleration in this context for our assignment is 2 times the distance divided by t squared. Now if you haven't typed math before, you'll note that I've used an asterisk here. That means times, so 2 times d. And then if I want to make something squared, if you go shift 6, it gives you this little upwards arrow sign. That's how you would then write, your number squared or, cubed or whatever. So that's what means squared. So we have 2 times d divided by t squared. So over here in my column for acceleration, I need to write a formula. So I'm going to start off with equals, open up some brackets, 2 times my distance. Now, this will depend on what you use in your experiment. I'm just going to say it was 80 centimeters. But remember, our formula, distance has to be in meters. So I'm going to say 2 times 0.80 for 80 centimeters divided by t squared. So let's open our bracket. T was our average time. So I'm just going to click on average time there. And then I'm going to go squared. Close my bracket and press enter. And that will calculate the acceleration for me. Now, because the distance in all of my trials was the exact same, it was just the time that was changing, I can actually tell Excel to copy the formula down, and boom, that's the acceleration for all 3 trials, or all different weights that I did in my little fake experiment here. Now, calculating the uncertainty of this acceleration is a lot more involved. Mrs. White's class, you might learn this, you might not. My class, we're probably not going to do the math for that. If you are curious about how to calculate that uncertainty, I'm more than happy to show you in like a tutoring session. We definitely do it in senior science, basically. So it's a bit more involved though, so we'll leave that for another day. But that is how to make Excel calculate all of your core numbers that you need in your data analysis. So once you have got all your data, the next step is to graph it. Now, probably the most common type of graph, I would say, is a scatter plot. A scatter plot is plotting 2 variables against each other with sort of separate little dots to represent each data point. And they're super handy because we can then tell Excel to put a trend line, whether it be a linear trend line or a parabola or whatnot, through our points to find a general trend. So we want to graph a scatter plot now. So to make a graph in Excel, we want to graph acceleration versus mass. So I'm going to highlight my y coordinates. So I want to plot the acceleration basically. So I'm going to highlight those. Then if I go to insert in this top left, go to the graphs, this little one here, that means scatter plot. Click on that one, the very first one. is what I want. So it's going to plot me a scatter plot. So boom, that is it there. So we can see these numbers here are our accelerations. So our y-axis is all good. However, our x-axis is not good. Our x-coordinate is not 1. It would be 100 for the mass, 200, 300. So let me show you how to change the numbers down here. Now, your new favorite button in Excel when it comes to graph is this one here, Select Data. So it's in the Chart Design tab, Select Data. It makes life so much easier. So we're going to select data. So you can see here, it's telling us that we had plotted some y coordinates, but we need to tell it to plot the corresponding x values, like 100, 200, 300. So what I do is, this little button here, if I press on it, it brings me back to my spreadsheet itself, and I can then go and highlight and select. So I just clicked and dragged what I want my x values to be. So I'm going to press enter. So it's now got the x values and the y values. So I can press OK, and you can see down here it's then changed my x values to actually be 100, 200, 300, which is accurate. Another thing for graphs, you need to make sure that you have got things like axes, titles, and whatnot. So your other favorite button is select data. We love that button. Your other favorite button is either like quick layout or add chart element. So add chart element allows you to individually add stuff to your graph. So for example, axes titles, I'm going to add a horizontal axes title and a vertical axes title. So I could then go in here and label, this is acceleration in meters per second. Note, include units. So label it. You must include these labels, by the way. So you want to label it, but you must include units as well. So I would then also label this axis down here. And can I give you some advice? Delete this chart title. One of my pet hates is when people have a chart title on their graph, but then when you eventually copy it over to Microsoft Word, you write another title, and so you have two titles, and that just bugs me. So I recommend delete that title and just write your title in Microsoft Word eventually. So here's my graph for now. Next step, so that's how to plot an actual scatter plot. Now I want to show you how to add a linear trend line, so basically a line of best fit. In class, we were kind of like eyeballing it. Excel's going to do some math to figure out what is the actual linear trend line here. So to do a trend line, click on the data points. It doesn't matter which data point, just click on one of them. It highlights all your data points. And if you right click, you get the option to add a trend line. Brings up this little box over here. We want a linear, so a straight line trend line. Linear line. And then can I also recommend display equation on chart? So you can see it has put in the linear trend line, and it has actually given me an equation. So you guys in math, you've all done linear equations. So you know that the format of a linear equation is y equals mx plus c, where c is your y-intercept and m is the gradient. So in this case, my gradient is negative 0.0058. So in your analysis, if you wanted to really go above and beyond in your analysis, you can not only just talk about the general shape, direction, etc. of your trend line, you could actually use the gradient as like a quantitative way of discussing it, so putting numbers to your words. In science, we love when you put numbers to your words. So that is how to get a trend line. So when you then go to analyze your data, you can talk about, the trend was, it was a negative trend with this type of slope. You would then go on to explain what that means, etc., etc. But basically, that's how you do it in Excel anyway. So I'm going to get rid of that window again. So we have made our data table, calculated stuff, made a beautiful graph, added a trend line. Now you need to copy all this over into Microsoft Word. So to copy something over into Microsoft Word, you just literally select it. I'm just going to go to here for now. And you can either press copy or, Command C for copy. Go over to Microsoft Word, Command V to paste, and boom, it puts your table over here. The very first thing I'd recommend doing is going up to table design and making it have all of the borders. That way you can actually, that's very thick, I'm going to make that thinner. having all the borders. So then you can go and make tables pretty later. Now, in your actual report, you need to have a table that is just your raw data, and then a separate table with the actual processed data. We really, like ideally, we don't want a giant table with everything in it. We want to separate it out into raw data versus processed data. So all I did is I basically made 2 copies of this table and then went, okay, the first one can be my raw data, so I'm going to delete these columns because that was all processed. And then in my second one, I'm going to delete the raw data just so I get, my actual processed data. So that's all I did to get these 2 guys here. You can see also I then went on to make them pretty a bit. So, I merged some cells and I highlighted some cells. So basically all of that can be found in table design. I would recommend just playing around here for a while. So, you can shade the boxes, different shades. I also like this one over here where you can, make the line thicker and you can choose to have it like outline that box thicker, whatever you want to do, basically. Like you've got the functionality to do it. So make all this pretty formatting, do in Microsoft Word. It's much easier to format in Microsoft Word. So that is how you would get your tables over here. You also need to copy your graph over. So it's just a simple case of clicking on your graph, clicking the outside of it, Command C for copy over here, Command V for paste, and it thinks for a bit. And with your title of your graph, that's when I would just write it actually in Microsoft Word. That way you're not doubling up on your titles. On the topic of titles, you can see tables are labeled table 1 dot whatever you're labeling it. Make sure it's descriptive. Your second table would obviously be table 2, blah, blah, blah. Graphs can either, are usually probably like graph 1, blah, blah, blah. So that is just your data. Now, in a student experiment, because you made Excel do all of the math for you, we still need to see that you need to show evidence that you know how to actually process your data. You know how to do the math involved. So this is a requirement. You actually need to also include a data table that has like sample calculations for processing data. So you might just pick one of your factors. So for example, I've just chosen here 100 grams. So I will just go sample calculations for 100 grams on the right-hand column, and on my left-hand column, I'm going to show you the formula used to process the data. So your table should basically look exactly like this. So in this left-hand column, I've said, first things first, I calculated the average time. So here's the formula I used. And then in this right-hand column, I actually, did the math for the 100-gram numbers. So boom, that was my average. Now note, because it's a measurement, it has uncertainty associated with it. So plus or minus 0.02 and a unit, seconds. But hey, this number for uncertainty, I actually calculated that. So I need to show that I know how to calculate the uncertainty. So I actually have my formula in here, and I calculated the number over 2. I just put it back up here because if it's a measurement, it has to have an uncertainty next to it. So you would have multiple boxes here, for all of your averages, for your acceleration, etc., etc. Whatever calculations you do, you need to show. And last thing that I will show you is, you can see, this is like special formatting. This is inserting an equation into Microsoft Word. So don't, when you type math, use equations. So you go insert, equation, and then you've got all these functions here. So for example, if I was just to copy the average one, so I typed average equals, and then if you want to use a fraction, there's a button up here for fraction, and you can type in the top part, you can type in the bottom part. If you ever have you need to do x squared or something, you've got script, so you can have, you can have x squared. Here's also the plus and minus button, by the way. So whenever you're reporting on uncertainty, so I typed 0.69 and then use this button up here, plus or minus. If you can't see that button, you might need to press this arrow to give you more options, and then it's in basic math, just go find it. That's how you get the plus or minus button. Whew, that is a lot of talking. Was that everything? Sample calculations? Yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. So honestly, have this video playing side by side when you're doing your assignment, and just keep pausing the video and copying exactly what I did. These skills are going to be useful not only in science, but also in math, your math assignments, potentially things like history and stuff. But yeah, using Excel is just a really valuable life skill. If you want help with anything, please feel free to send me an email or come see me in tutoring. I'm more than happy to sit down and help. Okay, that's all. Bye.